Ever wonder how Japan built an empire out of adult entertainment? We're not talking about a few cheesy flicks you find on the internet. We're talking about a billion-dollar industry that's shaped pop culture, tech, and even global economics. But how did a country with strict traditions and deep-rooted conservatism turn into the world's dominant adult entertainment powerhouse? Buckle up, because this ride is going to get weird. And it starts in the darkest of places. Okay, so before we dive into the rise of Japan's adult industry, let's be clear about something. Japan's adult entertainment scene didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's been decades in the making, with some seriously messed up chapters in history. To understand how Japan went from sexual exploitation during the World War II to becoming the global leader of adult content, you need to take a deep dive into some seriously heavy stuff. From the horrors of war to the innovation of the post-war era, Japan's adult industry went through some wild, sometimes disturbing phases before becoming the well-oiled, pun-intended machine it is today. Ready for a crash course in how Japan's adult empire got started? Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room: World War II. As much as Japan's adult industry is synonymous with tech, creativity, and weird subcultures today, its origins are tied to something a lot darker. During the war, Japan's military used women as comfort women, a term for sex slaves who were forced into sexual servitude by the Japanese army. These women were taken from occupied countries like Korea, China, and the Philippines. They were forced into brothels, where they were systematically exploited. While this is a topic that gets brushed under the rug in mainstream discussions about Japan's post-war success, it's undeniably part of the larger story of Japan's sexual culture. How does that tie into Japan's current adult industry? Well, after the war, Japan was left with a very broken and deeply traumatized society, but it also had a need. The demand for sexual entertainment didn't just go away after the war, especially in a culture where sexual repression and shame played a major role. Post-war Japan was filled with contradictions, strict social norms on the outside, but a booming underground demand for adult entertainment. The country would eventually exploit that demand to create something much bigger. And that's where we begin the story. Before we jump into the world of adult films and technology, let's take a look at a few staples in Japan's adult entertainment scene that don't get as much attention in the mainstream. We're talking about cabaret clubs and soaplands, two uniquely Japanese concepts that played a massive role in shaping the culture of the sexual entertainment. In Japan, cabaret clubs are a popular form of adult entertainment that combines socializing with a subtle sexual undertone. Now, if you're imagining some sleazy back alley joint, you're way off. Cabaret clubs are usually pretty upscale establishments, typically located in entertainment districts like Kabukicho in Tokyo, that cater to men who want a night of relaxation and, perhaps, some mild flirtation. The concept is pretty simple. You go in, grab a drink, and chat with the hostesses, usually young women, who are paid to keep the conversation going. There's no overt sexual activity, but the interactions are intentionally flirtatious. These women are trained to make their clients feel special, giving them attention and even light physical affection, like touching or playing games. The main goal is to boost the client's ego while keeping the vibe fun and comfortable. But here's where things get interesting. While these clubs aren't full-on brothels, they exist on a slippery slope where the boundaries between service and seduction blur. It's all about providing a fantasy, a moment of escapism from the pressures of work, relationships, and daily life. It's a cultural norm in Japan for men, and sometimes women, to frequent these places to unwind after long work days. However, these girls' bars were just one part of the larger sexual entertainment industry. They laid the groundwork for the more explicit avenues of adult entertainment that would follow. Over time, some of these cabaret clubs began to morph into places where a bit more happened behind closed doors, leading to the rise of more explicit forms of entertainment, such as soaplands. If cabaret clubs represent the milder side of Japanese sexual entertainment, soaplands take it up a notch. Soaplands are a more explicit type of establishment, offering a full-body bath service that's designed to be both sensual and highly intimate. And no, it's not just a bath in the traditional sense. You're not just sitting in a tub and chatting about your day. The experience is centered around physical intimacy. Customers are washed and pampered by women who are often wearing revealing outfits. The whole process is designed to be indulgent, relaxing, and, let's face it, a little naughty. The real kicker is that in soaplands, the sexual component is implied, but not always explicitly discussed. There's often an expectation that the services can go beyond just a bath to include sexual acts, but there's also a lot of discretion involved. Soaplands don't advertise full-on sexual services, but if a customer is willing to pay for extra, it's understood that the boundaries are much more flexible. So, while they were often marketed as a luxury bathhouse experience, they essentially existed as a form of escort service, but a little more normalized in Japanese society. Soaplands gained popularity in the 1970s and 80s, right alongside the boom in adult films and other forms of adult entertainment. These establishments capitalized on Japan's booming post-war economy, and the desire for more explicit sexual experiences began to intertwine with the country's economic expansion. Men who worked long hours in corporate Japan flocked to soaplands for a quick escape, combining the convenience of the service with an illusion of intimacy that many customers craved. These establishments existed alongside pink salons, girls' bars, and other forms of sexual entertainment, all of which helped normalize Japan's adult entertainment culture. People would frequently visit these places as part of their routine after a long day of work, contributing to the larger framework of sexual escapism that was quickly taking over Japanese society. But as these services became more popular, they also helped to push boundaries, allowing for a greater diversity of sexual fantasies to be explored. Now, let's jump into the real story: the crazy, rapid rise of Japan's adult entertainment scene. By the time the dust settled after World War II, Japan was looking to rebuild its identity. Its economy was in tatters, and the world had its eyes on the country. But amid this rebuilding, people still needed to escape the horrors of war. Enter the first major boom of adult content. The 1950s and 60s were like the prelude to everything that would eventually explode in the 1980s. But before we go into the 80s and 90s, let's talk about the core structure that was beginning to form. The pink films that emerged during this period were the ground zero for Japan's adult entertainment empire. These were low-budget films that were shown in small, offbeat theaters, often referred to as pink theaters. They weren't hardcore, but they were still different, more explicit than anything the country had seen before. These films were a kind of compromise, capturing the public's growing need for something more sensual without crossing the line into outright porn. It's funny to think about how these early films were made. Just enough nudity to keep the audience interested, but not so much that they'd get censored or shut down by authorities. This was survival mode for filmmakers, and it helped shape the industry in a way that would make it different from its Western counterparts. But there was also an inherent creativity that was born out of necessity. Japanese filmmakers couldn't just show full nudity or explicit acts, so they made it an art form. They created metaphors and visual symbols that suggested sexual acts or implied intimacy, which not only pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable, but also created an aesthetic that was uniquely Japanese. Over time, this became the foundation for the later explosion of Japan's adult content, the creative use of censorship. People often think of censorship as something that limits creativity, but Japan turned it into a kind of art. The famous pixelated mosaics that covered sensitive parts of adult films were not just a barrier, but a style, a hallmark of Japanese adult content that still lives on today. So, while the West might have been breaking all kinds of taboos with hard-hitting adult films, Japan took a different path, turning their cultural constraints into a form of creative expression. Then came the 1970s, and things really started to take off. By this time, the world had seen Japan's shift in terms of technology and economic growth. But the adult industry was also blossoming into something unexpected. VHS tapes hit the market, and with that came the explosion of adult videos. It wasn't just films anymore, it was about owning a piece of the action. And here's the thing, Japan was way ahead of the curve with VHS and home video tech. This format revolutionized how people consumed adult content, making it more accessible, private, and, let's be honest, a whole lot easier to find. And then, the rise of the Japanese AV idols. These women, often referred to as AV actresses, started to become massive stars. They weren't just the actresses you saw in films, they were idols, complete with their own fan followings, magazines, and even TV appearances. These women became cultural icons in their own right. A big part of Japan's adult industry appeal was how these actresses were treated like celebrities. They would have a career arc, not just a few films, but a whole body of work. They would appear on TV shows, participate in magazine photo shoots, and even release albums. This gave Japan's adult content a level of mainstream acceptance it hadn't seen before, and AV idols like Sora Ao and Maria Ozawa turned into stars well beyond the adult film industry. Even in China, where inspections are strict, Sora Aoi's SNS account had over 30 million followers, making her one of the more prominent foreign celebrities with a strong fan base. While the AV idols were becoming famous, something else was happening. Japan was getting its hands on the internet. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Japan's adult industry shifted dramatically from VHS tapes to online platforms. By this point, the rest of the world had already gotten online, but Japan was early to the game with its adult content. Websites, forums, and video streaming services focused entirely on Japanese adult videos began to emerge. The world was logging on to discover what made Japan's content different: the sheer variety and creativity. The content wasn't just about straight-up porn anymore. It was a whole world of fantasies, fetishes, and niches. You could find anything online, from softcore videos to bizarre parodies that nobody outside of Japan even thought of. Technology was the next frontier, and Japan didn't just sit back and watch, it led. Virtual reality porn? Japan was already pioneering VR technology that would allow users to experience adult films like never before. Interactive adult content? Japan's industry was designing sex toys that could sync with videos, creating an immersive experience. They didn't just stop at movies and stars. They created entire experiences. Fans could buy special gadgets, toys, and even interactive clothing that would allow them to feel more involved in the videos they were watching. This wasn't just about consuming adult content. It was about participation. Speaking of participation, let's talk about sex shops. Japan's sex shop culture is unlike anything else in the world. Unlike in many Western countries where sex shops can often feel sleazy or uncomfortable, Japan turned their adult shops into something closer to a funhouse of sexual curiosity. These stores didn't just carry a few novelties for a quick laugh. They offered innovation: sex toys, Lingerie and erotic gadgets were sold in sleek, high-end stores that looked like the interior of a tech store more than a dirty adult shop. And we're talking about high-tech toys, interactive dolls, VR sex suits, and even devices that could sync with videos, allowing fans to immerse themselves in experiences that were as close to reality as you could get. Japan also took it a step further by introducing sexual wellness into the mainstream conversation. Sex shops didn't just cater to desire, they helped normalize sexual exploration. These shops were about understanding what people wanted, and they didn't hold back. In fact, Japan led the world in making sex toys a normal part of adult life, not just some taboo item that only freaks bought. Japan's adult stores became a place where people could comfortably explore their fantasies and desires without fear of shame. Japan's adult industry didn't happen overnight. It was shaped by history, censorship, creativity, and technology. What started in the aftermath of a brutal war has evolved into one of the largest, most innovative, and influential industries in the world. From pink films in small theaters to global AV idols and immersive VR experiences, Japan has consistently pushed boundaries and turned challenges into opportunities. Japan didn't just build an adult empire, it built an empire of culture. Want to hear more interesting stories like this about Japan, or in another country? Let me know in the comments.